Hi everyone, my name is Claire. Before I tell you my story, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to share might remind you of someone you once trusted and what happens when that trust breaks. He used to laugh at me. Not the kind of laugh that comes from love, but the kind that strips away your confidence piece by piece. He'd do it in front of his friends, his colleagues, sometimes even in front of strangers, as if embarrassing me made him feel more powerful. I remember one night in particular, a dinner with his business partners. I said something simple, something harmless, and he looked at me, smirked, and said, "Claire, please don't talk about things you don't understand." Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. That night, I went to bed beside a man who didn't see me as his partner anymore, just as someone to belittle, to control, to mock. But life has a beautiful way of turning pain into power. Because today, he still lives in that same rented apartment, still chasing the dreams he once bragged about. And me? I wake up every morning in a penthouse overlooking the city skyline, the same city where he once made me feel small. He laughed then, but now I'm the one smiling. When I met Daniel, I wasn't looking for love. I was 26, focused on my small marketing job, living in a tiny apartment with dreams much bigger than my paycheck. My world was quiet, work, coffee, and a few good friends. Then one evening, my best friend dragged me to a charity event she was organizing, and that's where I first saw him. Daniel. He was everything I thought stability looked like. Tall, confident, well-dressed, and surrounded by people who seemed to adore him. He had that kind of presence that could fill a room, the kind that made everyone listen when he spoke. And somehow, that night, his attention found me. He walked up with a smile and said, "You don't look like you belong here, and I mean that as a compliment." I laughed, not realizing that line would one day feel like a warning. From that night on, he didn't stop calling, texting, or showing up outside my office with flowers. He made me feel special, seen in ways I'd never been before. He told me I was different, that I wasn't like the women in his world, too polished, too proud. At the time, I thought it was romantic. Now I know it was the first sign of the way he'd later measure me, not as an equal, but as someone beneath him. Our relationship moved fast. Within a year, he proposed at the same charity gala where we first met. Under the golden lights, with everyone clapping and cheering, he promised me a life full of love, laughter, and respect. And I believed him. Our wedding was beautiful, the kind people post about for weeks. A big white ceremony, hundreds of guests, champagne flowing like water. I remember looking at him during our first dance, thinking, I found my forever. People said we looked perfect together, the successful businessman and his sweet, devoted wife. They called us the dream couple. But behind that picture-perfect image were tiny cracks, ones I ignored because I didn't want to believe something so beautiful could break. He started taking control of everything, the money, the decisions, even the people I was allowed to talk to. He said it was because he wanted to protect me, and I wanted to believe him. He'd say things like, "You don't need to work anymore, Claire. I can take care of us." It sounded like love. But it was the beginning of my silence. I quit my job, thinking it was for our future. But slowly, I started to disappear inside the marriage, piece by piece. He became my world, and I didn't even notice when mine stopped spinning. Because at that time, I truly believed I had everything a woman could want. A husband who loved me, a beautiful home, a promising life ahead. Or so I thought. At first, the changes were small. So small that if you asked me back then, I would have said I was imagining things. That's how it always starts, not with shouting or breaking, but with little words that pierce deeper than any scream ever could. The first time it happened was at dinner with his friends. We were talking about travel, and I mentioned how I'd never been outside the country. Daniel laughed lightly and said, "Well, Claire's not exactly the adventurous type." Everyone chuckled. I smiled too, pretending it was funny, but inside something hurt. That night, when I told him it made me uncomfortable, he said, "You're too sensitive." It was just a joke. And I believed him. Soon, Those jokes became routine. At business events, he'd interrupt me mid-sentence. At family gatherings, he'd mock the way I spoke, the things I liked, even the way I dressed. Claire, don't say that, it sounds silly. Sweetheart, this isn't something you'd understand. Each time, I told myself he didn't mean harm. He was just confident, and I was just too emotional. But little by little, his confidence became my silence. He started controlling the way I looked, insisting on what I should wear because, as he put it, "You represent me now." I stopped wearing bright colors because he said they looked cheap. I switched my perfume because his ex had worn it and it made him uncomfortable. I told myself that's what love was, compromise. But compromise doesn't mean erasing yourself. I didn't know that yet. Our home became colder too. He was always busy, meetings, late-night calls, business trips. And when he was home, he was distracted. I'd try to talk about my day, my dreams, or just something silly I saw online, but he'd roll his eyes and say, "Claire, I have real problems to handle. Can we not do this right now?" I started shrinking without even realizing it. I stopped sharing my thoughts because they never seemed important enough. I stopped arguing because it wasn't worth the fight. I became quiet, polite, and careful. Everything he wanted. Friends began to notice. My best friend once asked, "Are you happy?" I smiled and said yes, but deep down, I wasn't sure anymore. I didn't even recognize myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked perfect on the outside. Designer clothes, flawless makeup, a husband with money. But behind that reflection was someone losing herself inch by inch. And the saddest part? I thought that was normal. I thought that's what marriage looked like, a little bit of sacrifice, a little bit of silence. But I was wrong. Those weren't cracks anymore. They were fractures, deep ones. I just didn't know that soon they'd break everything. It was a Friday evening, the night of Daniel's company's annual gala. I remember that day so clearly. Every detail burned into my memory, like a scar that never fades. I'd been preparing for weeks. It was the first big event since he had been featured in a business magazine, and he wanted me to look presentable. Those were his words. So I tried my best. I spent hours getting ready. A soft silver gown, light curls, and a touch of perfume he used to love. When I walked downstairs, he barely looked at me. Just a cold, distracted. "You took long enough." Still, I told myself it was just stress. He had a lot on his plate. That's what I always said, he's just tired. He doesn't mean it. The gala was held at a 5-star hotel downtown, a room full of chandeliers, polished smiles, and expensive suits. Everyone greeted him like he was the king of the night. And I, his wife, stood beside him quietly, smiling when needed, shaking hands when introduced. For a while, I felt proud. Proud to see him so respected. Proud to be part of his success. But pride has a way of dying fast when humiliation walks in. It started during his speech. He stood on stage, confident, charming, the way he always was in public. He began thanking his team, his partners, and then, almost as an afterthought, said, "And of course, my wife, who might not understand half of what I do, but supports me anyway." The crowd laughed. That deep, collective laugh that fills a room. And he looked straight at me while smirking. In that moment, time froze. My smile stayed, but my heart, it cracked wide open. I felt the air leave my lungs, but I couldn't move. I could only stand there, pretending to be okay, while inside I was crumbling. And then I saw her, Sophie, his business partner, the woman he had spent countless nights working with, the one he always spoke so highly of. She was standing near the front, her hand resting lightly on her wine glass, smiling in a way that said everything, without words. When Daniel stepped off the stage, he went straight to her, not me. He placed a hand on her back, leaned close, and laughed at something she said. And that's when I knew. That laughter wasn't just about me. It was at me. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Polite smiles, fake congratulations, and me sitting at the table, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. When we got home, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just looked at him and said quietly, "You humiliated me." He shrugged, poured himself a drink, and said, "Oh, come on, Claire. It was just a joke. Don't ruin the night." That was the moment something inside me broke completely. It wasn't my heart that had already been cracked. It was my silence. Because that night, I realized I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his shadow. And I knew I couldn't live like that one more day. The night after the gala felt heavier than any night before. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at the silver gown draped over the chair, the one I'd bought thinking it would make him proud. Now, it just looked like a costume, a disguise for the woman I used to be. Daniel came into the room humming, still holding his drink. He didn't even notice the silence, the stiffness in the air. "Don't tell me you're still upset about that," he said casually, loosening his tie. I didn't answer. He poured himself another drink and continued, "You really need to stop taking everything so personally. It was a joke, Claire. Everyone laughed. You're supposed to laugh too." And that was it. That was the moment I knew something inside me had changed forever. I stood up slowly and said, "Daniel, do you even hear yourself?" He looked at me, confused, slightly annoyed. Then he laughed, that same arrogant laugh that once made me blush but now made my skin crawl. "You're being dramatic again. You'll calm down tomorrow." But I didn't calm down. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat by the window all night, watching the city lights blur through my tears. Each one reminded me of the woman I had once been, full of light, full of dreams. Somewhere along the way, I had let him dim all of that. At dawn, I got up, opened the wardrobe, and started packing. Not everything, just the things that truly belonged to me. A few clothes, my journal, my laptop, and a small box that held my mother's bracelet. Every sound, the soft zip of the suitcase, the quiet creak of the floor, felt like a goodbye. When Daniel woke up and saw me packing, he frowned. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said simply. He stared for a moment, then scoffed. "Leaving? Don't be ridiculous. You won't last a week without me." And that's when I smiled for the first time in months. Because deep down, I knew that's exactly what he wanted me to believe. I left the house without another word. No dramatic exit, no final fight. Just silence, the kind that screams louder than any words ever could. Outside, the air felt different. It was cold, but it tasted like freedom. For the first time, I wasn't someone's wife, someone's joke, someone's shadow. I was just Claire. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have money saved up or a clear direction. All I had was pain and the quiet determination to turn it into power. As I walked down that long driveway with my suitcase rolling behind me, I whispered to myself, "You'll regret this, Daniel." He laughed as I shut the door. But one day, he'd realize. That laugh was the last sound of a man who had just lost the best thing he'd ever had. The first few weeks after leaving Daniel were the hardest of my life. I stayed in a small apartment on the edge of the city, one room, one window, and silence that felt deafening. There were nights I cried until morning, questioning if I'd made a mistake. There were days I almost called him, not because I missed him, but because I didn't know who I was without him anymore. But then, one morning, I looked at myself in the mirror, puffy eyes, messy hair, heartbroken, and I whispered, "You're still here, Claire." And that one sentence changed everything. I realized I had two choices, stay broken or rebuild. And for the first time, I chose myself. I started small. I went back to my old passion, marketing. But this time, I didn't want to just work for someone else's dream. I wanted to build something that was mine. I took online courses, spent nights watching tutorials, learning design, branding, and e-commerce. I barely slept, but every hour of work felt like stitching myself back together. I created a brand, a luxury skincare line called Rebirth. The idea came from my own healing. I wanted every product to represent strength, renewal, and beauty after pain. I started mixing formulas in my tiny kitchen, packaging them by hand, writing little notes that said, "You are enough." At first, no one cared. My first month, I sold only 3 products, 2 to my best friend and 1 to a stranger online. But I didn't give up. Because for the first time, I wasn't doing it to prove anything to anyone, I was doing it for me. I started sharing my story online. How I left a marriage that broke me. How I was learning to stand again. And slowly, women started listening. They didn't just buy my products, they connected with my story. They saw themselves in me. Within a year, my little brand grew. Orders started flooding in. A beauty influencer featured Rebirth in one of her videos, calling it a brand made by a woman who turned heartbreak into power. By the second year, I had my own team, my own office, and partnerships with luxury stores. I'd gone from sleeping on a secondhand couch to signing contracts worth more than Daniel's entire business ever made. And I didn't stop there. I invested smartly, learned about real estate, and built multiple income streams. Every deal, every success, every milestone felt like a quiet revenge, not out of hate, but out of pride. Because the man who once said I'd never survive without him had no idea he was the reason I became unstoppable. He took away my confidence, but in doing so, he gave me my purpose. And that's how I began living the life he once promised me, but could never give. It had been almost 3 years since the night I walked out of Daniel's house. 3 years of rebuilding, healing, and rediscovering the woman I had lost. By then, my life looked nothing like it used to. I lived in a bright apartment overlooking the city skyline, the same city where I once felt invisible. I had a team of 10 incredible women working with me, my brand Rebirth was thriving, and interviews and articles started featuring my story, from broken to boss. But success is a strange thing. The higher you rise, the louder the echoes of your past can sound. One evening, as I was wrapping up work, my phone buzzed. A message. From a number I hadn't seen in years. Claire, it's Daniel. I've been following your success. I'm proud of you. Can we meet? For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I simply felt nothing. The old me would have cried or hesitated. But the woman I'd become? She just smiled. I didn't reply right away. But a week later, fate did what it always does. It brought him back into my orbit. There was a high-end business networking event downtown. I had been invited as one of the keynote speakers, something that still felt surreal. I arrived wearing a tailored black gown, elegant and calm, no trace of the woman who once hid behind someone else's name. Halfway through the evening, as I was speaking to an investor, I heard a voice behind me.
Lo, familiar.
Claire? I turned, and there he was, Daniel. He looked older, not just in age but in spirit. His eyes had lost that sharp, arrogant gleam. The confidence he once wore like armor had turned into exhaustion. He smiled weakly. You look incredible. I almost didn't recognize you. I returned the smile. That's because you never really saw me before. He laughed softly, trying to break the tension. You've really made it big. I always knew you could. I tilted my head slightly. No, Daniel. You didn't. If you had, you wouldn't have broken me the way you did. For a moment, silence hung between us. Heavy, awkward, filled with unspoken memories. He shifted his weight and said, I made mistakes. I was stupid. I miss what we had. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who once mocked me, belittled me, made me feel invisible, now standing in front of me, wishing for a place in the world I had built alone. I don't hate you, I said softly. You were my greatest teacher. You taught me that no one saves you. You save yourself. He looked down, his voice barely a whisper. You've changed. I smiled, stepping past him toward the waiting crowd.
No, Daniel.
I just became everything you said I couldn't. As I walked away, I felt lighter than ever. Because that was the day I realized I didn't need revenge. My success was already enough. Sometimes, I wake up and can't believe how different my life looks now. The mornings are quiet, peaceful, the kind of peace that money can't buy, but healing can. I live in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking Central Park. The city stretches beneath me like a reminder of how far I've come. Every morning, I make myself a cup of coffee and watch the sunrise from my balcony, the same kind of sunrise I once watched from a small, lonely apartment, wondering if life would ever feel light again. Now it does, because I built this piece with my own hands. The walls of my home are filled with art, not because they're expensive, but because each one symbolizes something I fought for: freedom, power, and self-worth. My company, Rebirth, has expanded internationally. We're featured in magazines, our products on shelves in luxury stores I once could only window shop at. I have employees who call me a leader who listens, women who tell me that my story gave them courage to leave toxic relationships, to start again. And sometimes when I see their messages, I tear up, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. Because my pain didn't destroy me. It became my purpose. As for Daniel,
I still hear things about him from time to time.
his company struggled after a few bad investments. Sophie, the woman he once flaunted beside him, left years ago. He still lives in the same house we once shared, only now it's smaller, quieter, and lonelier. One evening, I saw him by accident. I was stepping out of my car at a luxury hotel for an event, dressed in a sleek black gown. And there he was, standing across the street, waiting for a cab. Our eyes met for a brief moment. He didn't wave. He just stood there, silent, almost invisible. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity either. I just felt free. Because in that moment, I realized something powerful. The greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's no longer needing to. He once laughed at me in front of everyone, mocked my dreams, my worth, my voice. And now, he lives surrounded by the echoes of what he lost, while I live surrounded by the life he only ever talked about. The penthouse, the success, the admiration, yes, it's beautiful. But the real luxury is peace. It's waking up without fear, without pretending, without asking for someone's approval. When I look in the mirror now, I don't see the broken woman he left behind. I see a woman who rose, gracefully, silently, and completely on her own. He once said I'd never survive without him. And he was right. I didn't just survive. I flourished. To every woman listening right now, I want you to hear me, not just with your ears, but with your heart. I know what it feels like to be silenced, belittled, and made to feel small. To sit at a table surrounded by laughter, realizing you're the punchline. To stay awake at night wondering if maybe you were the problem. You weren't. You never were. Sometimes, life places you in the fire not to burn you, but to mold you, to make you stronger, wiser, and more powerful than you ever imagined. I learned that the hard way. There was a time I thought love meant endurance, that if I just stayed patient, he'd change. But love isn't about shrinking yourself to make someone else comfortable. It's about standing tall beside someone who celebrates you, not someone who clips your wings. If you're listening to this and you feel trapped in a relationship, a situation, or even your own fear, I want you to remember something. You have the power to walk away. You have the power to rebuild. You have the power to begin again. When I walked away from Daniel, I didn't know what my future looked like. I was scared. I was broke. I was alone. But I had something more important than all of that. I had me.
And that was enough.
Piece by piece, I built a life I could be proud of. A life filled with purpose, passion, and peace. And I realized something beautiful. The same woman they laughed at can one day become the woman they envy. So, if they've mocked you, if they've called you dramatic, emotional, or weak, let them talk. Because one day, your silence will be louder than their laughter. Don't chase revenge. Chase healing. Because the moment you choose to rise instead of retaliate, you win in a way they'll never understand. Today, I don't wake up wishing to prove anything to anyone. I wake up proud of the woman I've become. Not because life was easy, but because I refuse to give up. So, to every woman listening, don't let anyone convince you that your worth depends on how someone else sees you. You are enough, even when they don't say it, even when they don't see it, even when they walk away. And one day, you'll look back, standing in your own version of a penthouse, whatever that may be, and you'll whisper to yourself, I made it, on my own. Because you will. You just have to start believing that you can. If this story touched you, leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories of love, betrayal, and strength.